Now, that was the first, should we say, reconsideration, the institutional changes, at least in my part of the world. The second point now is that of shrinking of the domain of culture. And here I would say yes, but. And this is maybe the optimistic or positive aspect. Culture strikes back. I would say the last 10 years back, you had a book of Harrison and Huntington, Culture Matters, exactly 10 years back. And his point is simply that one shouldn't neglect culture. And this is what you see within modern societies: identity problems, identity politics, cultural plurality. Culture has become a political important issue, which was not to that extreme some decades back. I would also add that also pre-modern cultures, if I allow myself to use that term, in modern settings have become part of the new culture. I'll come back to that. Criticism of religion is part of it. So I think, as a matter of fact, the thesis that the realm of culture is shrinking is not that true. Culture strikes back. Culture matters. In identity politics, in the revitalization of religion. And I will say a few words about religion here. First, we have the three monotheistic religions. From China, the three Western religions, if you like. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And then we have the old Asian religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, and the question about the borderlines, and that's an essential point, Confucianism. And then we have all the new ones, New Age, Scientology, Satanism, witchcraft. I mean, you have the whole range. And that's now the first point. How do you define religion? Who has the right to define religion? In China, you have made a choice, 5 kinds of religion, fine. But if you go to India, you have at least to include Hinduism. And that is also in the so-called Human Rights Declaration of the United States. It states religion should be respected. Yeah, you should respect all persons. But should you respect also what the Satanist is saying? Or is it not a religion? If it's not a religion, why is it not a religion? It's an evil God. Should God always be good? And if you look at the three monotheistic religions, there is one God who has created the world, but why then all these disasters? That's a problem of evil. Starts in the Bible, goes on straight through the whole thing, and it's a basic problem. So, I mean, here again, you see that culture isn't only something given, but it's something with claims, something you have to evaluate and look into. Which means that philosophy has to be included, not only in terms of those who are paid as philosophers, but those who are able to do philosophical work, namely to think about what's going on. So, to the extent that religion, whatever that might be, has coming back, then you have the question of how to what is it, and how should we evaluate it? And I see, and this we might discuss, at least when it comes to those religions with validity claims, stating one God, lawgiver, then judges, and penalty for eternity, for instance, something like that. Then it has to be discussed, as theologians have done always. And also, if they say, human beings could be raised so and so on, if you do so and so on, then human beings will be good. Well, that's a psychological question. Does it work? I mean, you have to look at it. So I think there is no way back. There is no way back as to look at a both a criticism of rationality, a criticism of the sciences, but also a criticism of the religions. And that is what Habermas calls a modernization of consciousness. Habermas recently have been quoted sort of on the sympathetic side, being very positive to religions, but one has not quoted his other side, namely that there is a need for a modernization of religion. So, not only de facto actually is religion back in various forms, but in some cases with good reasons. I mean, there are religious attitudes that are intellectually acceptable and interesting and all that, but not all are. And that's an ongoing discussion. And that's a discussion we have to take. So, that's a part of religion. Then it comes to cultural matters. I would say two things. Our foreign minister came back from the UN meeting in New York, and he said, now culture is on the agenda. So, I mean, that's how it is. Culture is now on the agenda. As a matter of fact, in internal, national, and international affairs. But then, I would say ontological, as a fact. But it's more to it. It is also, do not only talk about religion, but the culture. It's also important to understand culture in order to understand the modern world. If you want to understand what's going on in the Middle East, you have to understand how people think. You might say they are wrong, but you have to understand how they think. And that, I think, is a basic mistake of NATO's new strategy of preemptive strike. Why? If you have a defense just to take the offender when it comes to your borders, you have no choice and you strike back. But if you have a strategy whereby you should go into a foreign place to do away with the regime and to install a new regime, let's say a constitutional democracy with liberal values, then you have an overburdening not only on the military, economic, and institutional level, but also epistemically. You have to know when and where to attack and how to proceed and how to relate to those who are there and how to install the new institutions and how to get them working and how to know when and where to get out. And that is quite a big deal. Some of you might have read that after some years the Americans found out they needed social anthropologists in Afghanistan. They should have known. I mean, it started in the Balkans, it went on in Iraq, and it went on in Afghanistan. I'm not saying that one should not be chasing bin Laden, but that's one thing. Another thing is to have this very ambitious project. And one should be realistic because, and that's not my point, culture matters. And be aware, I mean, that's very difficult. In some cases, there are things one should not do because it's too complicated. Now, I would like to add one thing about restraints, a comment on truth problems that I alluded to in the beginning. I said that legal constraints are not the major issue today, and that's true. But recently, some of you might have heard, in Iran, one of those religious leaders announced that there were too many students in the humanities, and that was not good. They should study sciences and technological fields and go to Quran schools. The humanities and the social sciences did no good. They created criticism, and that was not preferable, he said. And this is an old idea. I mean, goes back in all three monotheistic religions, and in Islam it goes back to Said Qutb, the Egyptians who wrote Milestones in 64, when he was in jail and before he was executed, tragic. But there you have another aspect, and that is that religion has become politicized and militarized without the humanities. And that's a major concern. So that's a restriction, for sure. So, a crisis of the humanities, yes. But somewhat differently from what I stated, maybe because of changes in the world in which we are living. But I would say humanities, like culture, has become not less, but more important in the modern world. But then, partly because we all live in this world of ours, which is a daily world. I mean, we can't come out of it. That's the first point. The second point is, and that goes back to what I have said about criticism and philosophy, not as a profession, but as an activity. Due to these problems in modern societies, there seems to be no way of getting around the need to reflect on the various disciplines, what I can do and what I cannot do. And that is what philosophy should be. So when I'm working as a philosopher at the Center for the Theory of the Science and the Humanities, that is just what we are doing. And we are giving courses to all who take their doctoral degrees, because that is what they should know before they get their degrees and get out in society. And this, I think, is very serious. So there are two institutions I've been establishing at my university. The one is the Center for the Humanities and Study of Science and Humanities, and the other one is Marco Polo. Yes, I'm proud of both of them. Yes. Okay. So, but then, this is not only a problem for the humanities, but for all academic fields, because in all fields, in economy, what do the economists know and what do they not know? Apparently, they often think that the world is exactly what they see with their models, but that's certainly not true. And which models again? So this about the perspective aspect of all sciences, that all sciences somehow see something and not everything. That goes through the whole thing. So this, if this is a crisis for the humanities, it's a crisis for the whole bunch of sciences. Which means that this need for reflection, this need for the humanities in the sense of the philosophy and theory and study of the sciences and humanities, that is a need that is related to all disciplines. So it's not only a crisis for the humanities. Then two more points, well known, but not unimportant. The one thing is that what we are doing is fallible. It's not always the absolute truth. What we are at are better arguments, views that are better confirmed. But there are always an element of uncertainty. And often it's not even the situation that we can calculate the risk. Very often we do not know. But that doesn't mean that this is a simple uncertainty. Some people argue, for instance, in North America, that since Darwinism is not totally certain, then what is called creationism, that God has created, is equally good. But that doesn't follow. Some positions are better than other positions. There is a gradual thing. There is a melioristic, an improvement thing. So that things are uncertain doesn't mean that we give up. On the contrary, it keeps us going in getting better positions, and it could not get all kinds of strange, unconfirmed views into the arena. And finally, sure, we should also be aware, personally and institutional-wise, that there might be power-inflicted aspects, interests behind. One should always ask who are financing that kind of research, why one might have biases ideologically, psychologically, etc. That's also something we should be open to. So that's well known. So if there is a crisis, there is a crisis that is in need for some help of the kind I mentioned. I am not quite ready, but there are 2 points and then I will conclude. The first point is we have been talking about truth. And the sciences are related to the seeking of truth. Not having the truth, but trying to get better arguments, better confirmed positions. And that's a universalistic aspect. And in that respect, there are also norms that are universal. At any person, student or teacher at university, one has to be open to counter-arguments. A person who do not want to listen to counter-arguments is no more a participant in this game. So, to respect other people and to be open to better arguments, those are norms that are constitutive for what we are doing. In that sense, they are universal, they are unavoidable. So the sciences, and that's strange you would say science is facts. Yes, no, science is an activity. And science as an activity is tied up with some norms. There are various norms. Some might be just a question of choice, but some are not. And that's important. So then might be said, well, there are some norms, but then there are pluralities, cultural pluralities, and that's true, and some of that plurality is possible because we have general laws that allow for people to behave, and if they personalize their views, they can live peacefully together. But I would add one more thing. And now I go into the substantial matters, and that might be discussed, certainly. I would also say that we have to have a notion of what I would call deep experiences and functional needs. Those are not universal, but in a given society there might be deep experiences. That might be good or bad, lead to various things, but they might, for instance, lead to trust. Because trust is not something you can decide upon or prove. It has to be worked out in the interaction between various groups. So if you want, and without trust, how can you get many political institutions working? I mean, how can you get a person voluntarily get out of office because for votation if he or her, she is in danger of being maltreated or the society being treated badly? Well, you have to trust those in opposition. If there is not a basic trust, many institutions won't function. So trust is a basic thing, and that has to be seen. It's not, you should say, universal, but if you have some arrangements, it's a pre-political virtue. And then there are functional virtues. I live in a social democratic society with a well-established welfare state. But for sure, in a welfare state, you have to have working morality, self-restraint on your consumption. There are lots of virtues. If you do not have that, and if there are virtues, you will get into trouble. So there are some virtues that are functional in that society. And that should also be said. Because when you live on the campus, some people are so isolated from the world around that they think that everything is up for choice. But that might not be the case. Okay. Yeah. Usefulness was seen as related to instrumental sciences. That was seen as something leading to progress. And the whole process of modernization was seen as positive and as a progress. As we know, this is no more the case. What started very optimistically is now ambiguous. Just take nuclear power. It can be used and misused. What is useful can also be dangerous and detrimental. This we know. I just want to add it, and it has to do with the ethics of what we are doing. Namely, that to justify what we are doing simply, and this goes also, and not least for the natural sciences, technology, and all that, by instrumental rationality, because everything today can be misused. So therefore, it is not enough with instrumental justification. Ethical concerns are also needed, and then a discourse on these norms are also needed. Okay, 2 minutes passed, and now I'll conclude. I think this article, Crisis in Humanities, Challenges of Culture in Modern Societies, do make good points still, but 4 points. I think it has become worse due to university restructuring. Not in all respects, it's ambiguous, but mainly. Point 2, it is better because culture is less shrinking than I thought when I wrote this paper. The domain is not that in a shrinking position. But thirdly, that means on the one side that culture is needed to understand the world, but it's also needed to evaluate this culture. And for that reason, humanities is in double sense important, also as a critical philosophical endeavor. And final point, these crises are not only crises for the humanities, but crises for all academic fields, and therefore all for society in general. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.